Hi beautiful, I had planned to film a whole different video right now. However, my Natasha Denona Bloom palette just arrived. So guess what we're doing? We're doing a Natasha Denona Bloom palette review. I cannot wait to put these shades on my eyeballs. Here is what the packaging of the palette looks like. It has Natasha's watercolor painting on the outside. It says Natasha Denona Bloom palette. This is of course made in Italy. It has a 24-month shelf life and it retails for $69. However, if you are purchasing it from the Natasha Denona website, you can save 15% with my code PATTY15 at checkout, and that should bring the price of this palette to about $58, which sounds better, right? Anyways, I cannot wait to open it and see and swatch and play. In today's video, I'm going to give you my thoughts and opinions on this palette. I'm going to compare the palette side by side with other Natasha Denona palettes in my collection, and we are going to create 2 eyeshadow looks. So if you're excited for all of that, don't forget to please give the video a thumbs up and let's go ahead and get started. Got the palette out of its box and take a look right here at what the beautiful outside packaging looks like. This is definitely a warmer toned eyeshadow palette, and you get it from the vibes on the outside and the actual packaging. It definitely has a lot of coral vibes to it. So let's go ahead and open it up. Check it out. Take a look right there. I have all white lighting in front of me. There's no yellow lighting right now that could make this look warmer than it is. So as you can see, this one is definitely on the warmer side. This right side of the palette, which I was really excited about, is definitely not as cool toned as it seemed in some of the original pictures that were launched. However, with it being a warmer palette, I also have to say I think it's beautiful. It is definitely a coral palette. I don't find it to be orangey except for this middle shade right here. It's honestly a pretty coral, warm rose type vibe that I'm getting from it. My biggest disappointment right now is that I was really expecting shade Clover to be a bit more of a grayish purpley type shade, and it's not at all. It's more like a deep dusty rose type color. And then this shade Brick, I feel like on the camera it looks very vibrant, and when I look at it in person it's not as vibrant as it's looking on camera, but it is a pretty much a bricky color. Anyways, I cannot wait to swatch all of these shades for you, so let's just get that out of the way. Hair up, sleeve down, let's get started with the swatches. I'm of course going to go across. So starting with the first shade. So far it feels just as creamy as Natasha Denona's palettes usually do. Here are the first 4 shades on my finger. Fluorescence is a metallic shade. Bark and Keen are both creamy mattes. And actually so is Ren. All 3 of these are creamy mattes and this is a metallic. Here are the next 4 shades. We have Fleur, which is a duochrome shade, and then we have Crisp and we have Lush, which are both sparkling foiled shades. If you're familiar with Natasha Denona palette, is the very classy, sparkly type formula Natasha makes. So I'm pretty excited about those because those usually look really good and very sparkly on the eyes. And then the 4th shade is the shade Brick, which is a creamy matte. Here are the next 4 shades. Rue is a sparkling foiled. Floss is a creamy matte. Petal is a creamy matte. This one you're not going to see that well because it's pretty close to the color of my skin. And then the last one here is the shade Ember, which is a sparkling foiled shade. Here is what everything is looking like so far. And then we have the last 3 shades. Robin, which is a creamy matte. Clover, which is a creamy matte, and then Equinox, which is a duochrome, but it honestly looks pretty sparkly as well. So maybe it's like a duochrome metallic shade. Very pretty. So check it out. Here is how all of these shades swatched. Now that we've seen the swatches, let's go ahead and play with the palette. I'm going to start with the Rephr number 15 thick fluffy blending brush in the shade Petal down here. And I'm going to blend the shade Petal all throughout the crease of my eye. As a base slash transitioning shade, just back and forth right here. This one on me, as you can see, is pretty invisible, but I can see it as a beautiful brightening color on a darker complexion, or if you have a lighter complexion than I do, it could be a true transition shade for you. For me, it's a little more like a base. So I'm going to go into the shade Ribbon, and with the same brush, use Ribbon as my transition shade, blend it on top of the shade Petal. And now we can start seeing some color come through. A bit more of the shade Robin on the outer third of my eyelid and blending it into my previous shade, just like so. Switching to a reference number 1 in the shade Brick, because I'm going to try and use as many colors as I can. With Brick on a reference number 1, I'm going to deepen up the outer third of my eyelid here and blend it up into the crease. And Brick has been the shade I've been the least excited about, I will say, because it's the most orangey, the most warm one of them all. And so I'm lightly blending it into my crease. And I'm going to deepen things up even more with the shade Bark. Still using the reference number 1. Just tapping the color Bark on the outer third of the eyelid and further blending it into the rest of the shades. Back with the blending brush, just making sure everything is diffusing beautifully into each other. And with my finger in the shade Ember, I'm going to add a bit of shine to the center of the eyelid by just tapping this color right there. Moving on to the shade Lush right here. And I want to add that one to my eyelid as well. Blending it into my previous shimmer and moving towards the inner part of the eye. Just tapping the color on the eyelid. This looks pretty fiery and honestly more on the dramatic side, but I want to test out all of the shades, so I have to go to the darker shades as well as the lighter ones. I'm going to keep going with a reference number 28, which is my favorite flat brush, and the shade Crisp, because this is the inner corner shade from this palette for sure. So tapping it on the inner corner and then bringing it in halfway through the crease and blending it into my previous shimmers. Just like so. And I'm going to use the shade Brick on a pencil brush and smudge it underneath my lower lash line. The shade Bark, I'm sorry. Bark underneath my lower lash line. And then I'm going to smoke it out with the shade Robin on a reference number 14. Just back and forth. Take a look. Here's the first look with this Natasha Denona palette before any eyeliner. And I think for eyeliner on the waterline, I'm just going to use a brown one so that it matches everything. I'll definitely show you what this looks like with some lashes as well. But here is the finished first look with mascara on, since I was wearing mascara from the beginning. And so now let's work on the second look, which I'm pretty excited about because now I get to play with the shades that aren't as warm. So I'm going to start with the shade Wren, which is a pretty pink coral type color, and use that one as my crease shade. A bit more Wren. And I'm using a reference number 15 to blend it out all throughout the crease. And I'm focusing it on the inner part of the crease as well, because I think I'm going to do a halo eye for this one. So with the reference number 1 and the shade Floss, which I think Floss is a pretty beautiful color, I'm going to add more depth to the outer third of my eyelid right here. Just tapping it in place at first. And then with the tip of my brush, I'm going to work it into my crease. And by the way, these shades, needless to say, are working wonderfully. Like, the formulas are very pigmented and they are very smooth and they are giving me no trouble at all blending. They're flawlessly blending into one another. Very little resistance. They're performing as what we've come to expect Natasha Denona palettes to perform like. So I'm going to get more of that Floss shade and add it to the inner third of the eyelid as well. And I'm going to clean off the center of the eyelid because I was messy with my mattes and I want it to be a bit of a more dramatic halo eye. So if I leave those dark shades on there, it's not going to give the very halo-y effect. And it's okay that I created harsh lines. You'll see that'll resolve itself in a second. Once I put the shimmers on, you won't see those. But before I do that, I do want to use the shade Clever because I want to use as many shades as possible. So we gotta go with this one. And I'm going to add it on the outer third of my eyelid. And it immediately just kind of blended perfectly back there. I'm not even going to fuss with it much, just also adding it to the inner third. And it just gave this a bit more of a rosy tone. I actually really like the tone that it gave this eye look. So let's go for the shimmers. I'm going to use the shade Equinox. Do I want to use a brush? Yes, I want to use a brush so that I can be more precise. So here's the shade Equinox, and I'm using the reference number 28, and I'm going to add it right over that messy edge I created when I cleaned on both sides. Just like that. And then I'm going to bring that brush into the shade Crisp and add Crisp right in the center. Back with my number 14 brush, just making sure to clean up the sparkles that flew to the sides. Clever, I'm going to add some Clever to the under eye as well, and right underneath my tear duct area. And then the shade Crisp right in the center of the under eye. Lastly, I'm going to grab Ren with a small blending brush and smoke out my lower lash line. I will say, using the shimmer shade Crisp underneath the eye, and I wasn't super careful with my brush either, definitely not my best idea, because that move gave me a lot of fallout. So definitely be more careful than I was if you do that. With that said, I love this look. This looks super pretty. Brown eyeliner once again. And take a look before any lashes at the finished second look with this palette. Here's what they look like side by side. The more neutral eye versus the warmer, more fiery eye. And again, I went very dramatic with the palette because I wanted to test out as many of the matte shades and the shimmer shades as I possibly could. But there are plenty of much lighter looks that you can create with this palette for sure. Back to show you what it looks like with lashes on. These are Kiss lashes, I believe, in the style is High Bun. So here is look number 1. And look number 2. And I found the perfect lipstick duo with both of these eyeshadow looks, and it is a new shade for YSL Candy Lip Glazes in the shade 16. It is a beautiful peachy corally type color, perfect for the summertime. So check it out, take a look right here. I've pulled every single Natasha Denona palette that I'm thinking you might want to see this palette compared to, so let's go ahead and put them side by side. Here is the Bloom palette in comparison to I Need a Nude. Here it is in comparison to I Need a Warm. Compared to the Golden palette. Compared to my Dream palette from Natasha Denona. Retro Glam in case you wanted to see it next to these peachy shades. Zendo in case you wanted to see it next to these warm shades right here. Next to the Bronze palette because they're both warm in different ways. And next to the Retro palette because they both have rosy shades. This happens to me a lot with Natasha Denona palettes where she'll release a color story and I think that I probably have another Natasha Denona palette that somehow has similar looking shades. And like if I maybe scour through like every single one of my Natasha Denona palettes, I could possibly come up with shades that kind of look similar to the ones in here. But then at the same time, as you just saw, this palette is also pretty different color story wise from the rest of the palettes she's released before. Whether you need this one in your collection or not is ultimately up to you, and also whether this type of color story is one that attracts you. So I'm going to leave the decision to you. I personally am glad I added this one to my Natasha Denona collection, and I think that while it's warmer than I expected it to be at first, I do also like these types of shades. Not so much the very warm shades on this side, but I am really digging this eyeshadow look I created second. And the only reason I don't love this one is because I used the shade Brick, but I wanted to use as many shades as possible. But if I avoid that shade, I know I can create endless looks with this palette that I'm going to absolutely love. I told you guys in my live video the other day that I would let you know whether or not I'm going to create a 5 looks 1 palette with this one once I had it with me, and once I analyze whether I like this palette enough to create a 5 looks 1 palette with, and the answer is yes, I'm going to create a 5 looks 1 palette with this one because I really like this color story. And I showed you 2 very dramatic looks today, but I want to show you lighter, more everyday, more casual looks you can create with this palette that I think are also going to be very beautiful. So if you guys liked today's video, don't forget to please give it a thumbs up before you leave. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and if you want to stay tuned on that 5 looks 1 palette video coming up. I love you all so much. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you back in the next video. Bye.